and differentiate the types of impact story and their use, and then evaluate audience for an impact story and determine the best type of story to write, and hopefully create some meaningful impact stories with service. So I just want to get started really quick with just a quick check-in. So I'm going to ask folks, just to say your name and how's it going and what your favorite winter activity is. So I'm just going to start with Mindy is first on my list. So I'll ask Mindy to start off.
Hey, everybody. We don't get a lot of winter here in this part of the country or in this part of Arizona, but when I did have winter, I did like to snow ski downhill with the old-fashioned 2 skis.
Awesome. How about you, Alicia?
Hi, it's going good for me. And I would say that my favorite winter activity is making tamales with my family on Christmas, as well as having posadas, because I just go with my family and it's a lot of family time and a lot of eating.
I love that. How about you, Amy?
It's been busy with FAFSA and going to different schools up and down north and the Prescott Valley. My favorite winter activity back east, we always go to New York City during the holidays to see the tree and then walk up and down 5th and 7th Avenue with my husband and my son.
That's great. There's nothing quite like the tree in this at the Rockefeller Center. Have you ever gone skating at Rockefeller Center?
No, every time we try to, it's packed. It's like I don't want to wait in line.
Yeah. How about you, Dee?
I'm doing all right, and my favorite winter activity is when winter is over.
That's fair. Not everyone loves winter. I do, but
I don't live in Flagstaff anymore just because of that.
That's fair. That's fair. How about you, Gracie?
I'm doing great, and my favorite winter activity is snowboarding. I'm from Iowa, so Flagstaff is definitely an improvement in that sense.
You mean you can't go snowboarding amongst the corn? How about you, Hannah?
I'm doing pretty good, but I feel like I'm getting a cold because it is so cold in Flagstaff. I just have the sniffles really bad. Other than that, I'm in there. Oh, and my favorite winter activity is just getting together with family. That's really it. Not too crazy about the winter sports. It's too wet and cold.
No worries. How about you, James?
Favorite winter activity, I guess. Well, we don't get any snow in Phoenix, obviously, but one of the things that my family does as tradition is decorating the house, having a Christmas party every Christmas Eve, and listening to the Jackson 5 Christmas album. Like that is darn near on repeat during Christmas time.
Great. How about you, Kelly?
Hi, let's see. My favorite winter activity is cross-country skiing, and I absolutely love the weather in Flagstaff. I'm hoping we have a huge snowfall this year. But yeah.
How about you, Kiernan?
Hi, I'm doing okay. I'm pretty sick right now. And then my favorite winter activity, I think, is just hanging out with family, like around the holidays.
And hope you feel. I hope everyone who is under the weather feels better. I was a little bit yesterday, so I am definitely understanding. Natalie.
I'm doing well so far because just the coldness really affects me in a way. I don't know, either I get sick or it's just really cold. But my favorite winter activity is I like the idea of the holidays. I just like decorating. I love Christmas. And I really like family time. And I like drinking tea. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. How about you, Sonoma?
I'm doing well, and my favorite winter activity probably would be getting some hot chocolate and then driving around and looking at all the pretty lights.
I like that too. How about you, Sarah?
Hi, I just got COVID for the first time, so I'm also not doing so great. But I do love winter and I love snowboarding too.
Well, hopefully you have a mild course of it and you feel better soon. How about you, Maddie?
I'm doing good. I feel like my favorite winter activity is reading, or I always like watching the holiday specials, like the Charlie Brown Peanuts. It always feels very like nostalgic and cozy.
I was waiting for you to say Lifetime movies.
Oh, I also do that when I go visit my grandma in Virginia. She's waiting to watch all the Hallmark movies with me until I visit. So there will be plenty of that.
I felt like we had discussed that at some point. How about you, Shelley?
I'm doing well. I'm not sick, but my husband's sick. So I guess it's just the season. And my favorite winter activity is having permission to drink eggnog because I love it. And just, yeah, being cozy. I love that. I actually really like shoveling snow, which is weird, but I don't know. It's kind of fun. So
I think Russ also enjoys shoveling snow. I don't think he's here, but I believe Russ is also an enjoyer of snow shoveling. I am not. In fact, last year, remember when we had all that snow? I took advantage of someone else's parking spot that had been cleaned out, and they left a nasty little note on my car, which did not dissuade me from using that parking spot. There's your deep dark secret from me. Anyone that I missed? I think someone came in just a few moments ago that I might have missed. Noel.
Hey, sorry. What did I miss?
We're just how's it going? We're just doing a quick check-in. So how's it going, and what your favorite winter activity is?
Everything's going well. I just got in from doing a DoorDash delivery for homebound seniors. That's picking up really fast. Everything's going fantastic. And my favorite winter activity would honestly be playing in the snow.
Which you don't get to do a lot down in Phoenix, but you know.
No.
I think they would probably have to declare a national emergency if they had snow in Phoenix of any kind. So, great. Well, thank you guys. I'm always excited to hear how things are going and what you guys are up to. So thank you so much. You know, like I said, hope folks who are feeling a little under the weather feel better. You know, today's story is really about, today's training is really about impact stories, which our first ones were due in October. And for the folks who turned them in, they were, you know, I thought they were all pretty good, but I like to just give you all some additional training. And I want to be clear that some of this training is just straight up unsolicited free advice. I don't claim to be any kind of expert on some of these things, but I do have a lot of experience. So I just want to be clear that some of this, like I said, is unsolicited free advice. So what is an impact story? So when you've seen that, you might have different ideas about what that means. for me, really what an impact story is it's a way for us to tell the service story, right? And the impact that your service has had, whether it's on an individual, a community, or the organizations that you serve. And a really well-written impact story should inform, measure, and personalize the impact of that service. Because what we know is that stories are really powerful. Like, I can tell someone, oh, my members do X, Y, and Z, and describe what your service is. But when I tell them a narrative story, or you tell that narrative of what you've done, that's way more powerful than just like telling them things. And really what they allow us to do is to activate individuals to take action, either through teaching them how they themselves could make an impact, or through cultivating new partnerships. And so by sharing those relatable, compelling stories, we really show the value of our programs. So here at CSV, we use your stories in a lot of different ways. So when you are writing those impact stories and putting them in Encore, or for Vista, when you're putting them in the forms for Ramsey, when you're telling him about what you've done, what we're going to do with those is share them informally with prospective partners or community members, especially because I'm not there watching you serve every day, right? We might get to do a site visit once in a while, but it's pretty rare for us to actually ever get to see what you're doing on a regular basis, even if you're here on campus. I think Sarah's probably the least that applies the least to Sarah's work, because like I get to see the amazing work that Sarah's doing all the time because it's right outside my window. But most of the time I don't get to see that. And so having your stories like helps us be able to tell your stories to others, to share them out with the community about what we're up to. When we go to a community meeting, when we're when we're at something on campus talking to someone. We also include them in our quarterly and annual reports to the governor's office. So we are responsible for doing a quarterly report. And part of that is member impact. So there's a whole narrative section that we have to write each month for each of our 3 state and national grants. That is what your impact is. And I pull, Ramsey and I both pull those directly from those impact stories that you write. And that's how I frame my narrative, is based upon what is in your stories. And then we also use them to develop marketing and social media. Kyle used them. And we just, I think we can say, we've hired a new social media person who'll be starting at the end of the month. I'm super excited to have Colin on board. And so he'll be, have access to these things as well. And so, that's how we really use those things. So that's just to let you know how we use them and why they're important. Any questions about that part before we kind of moved on into like a construction part? Like, do you guys have questions about why we make you do impact stories, or what an impact story really is?
Yeah, could I like get an example for what an impact story would look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a well-written, so an impact story is, I like to think of them, I think the ones we ask you to do, right? And you will see this in different going forward in your careers, you will be asked especially if you decide to stay in like the nonprofit realm, but even in the for-profit realm, this comes up where you have to like tell someone what the impact of your work was. So for me, I kind of think of it as like a very quick and dirty 5-point essay, right? It's we ask you to do a 3 to 5 question, 3 to 5 sentence kind of a story for your impact. And so to me, there's some essential elements that you need to have in your story. And so they need to tell, and I'm sure that you've heard some of these things, but where, what, who, and how, and then what were the results of the service. So you should always tell, anytime you're writing a story about what your service impact was, you should include those elements. So where, you know, you want to set the stage, convey to the reader information about the location of where the impact happened. So that, like, for example, you shouldn't say, well, the event happened in Flagstaff, but you really want to paint that picture for the reader. Let them, when they're reading it, understand where they're, you know, where they're going and where they're coming from, or, you know, where this happened at, and why that location in particular is important to them. Obviously, you know, what were they doing? What were you doing? What kind of work was happening? Who did you partner with? So were there volunteers involved? Did you engage any community leaders? Those are all really important questions for you to ask yourself when you're writing it, and then address them. And then you also want to make sure you want to clarify the population you served, and include any information regarding media that covered your service. So for example, if you held an event and you know, the local newspaper came to it, you'd want to make sure, or if you know, Sarah had an event at the garden and it was covered in the school newspaper, or on the school radio, or on the local radio, or NPR, you know, you would want to know that, because that way we know that, right? That's a big deal to us, and a big deal to those who care about national service. I will try to read. Oh, Maddie, thank you. That's a great example. It's hard for me to read chat on this because I don't have it in a separate window, so I have to, like, yeah, anyway. So how? So tell your readers how you did it. That can be as specific as you feel it needs to be, but honestly, sometimes less is more. Like, you don't always have to, like, get into the nitty-gritty details. And we'll talk about this a little bit in audience later, but, like, for example, if I'm asking you for 3 to 5 sentences, think about what is the most economical way to use your language on that. And for example, a lot of times, if you're writing a grant and you need to write a statement of need or a statement of impact, there's often a word limit, because they're, especially for the bigger grants, they're reviewing tons and tons of grant applications, and they have a limited amount of time that they're going to be able to spend, so they don't give you free rein a lot of times. And then results, obviously, you know, data is a really impactful way to tell stories, but I think you have to keep your audience in perspective when you're giving results and data. So which data points is someone going to find really impactful? And I'll show you, if we have time at the end, I'll give you an example of something we just did in our office, as essentially an impact report for our volunteer fair. So we really had to think about what data points we thought the president's office, because that's who we were sending it to, would find meaningful, right? So we had tons of data, but what was the most meaningful? So was it how many organizations we engaged, or was it how many, you know, people came? Like, what was the thing that's going to get the president's office to go, oh yes, this was a good use of our $6,000. So that's when I say that, that's what I mean, is, like, you don't want to overwhelm people with a bunch of numbers, because if you throw a bunch of numbers to people, especially in a short period, a paragraph, they're often going to just glaze over it. Think about yourself too when you read things. Like, I always ask myself, well, I want to read that. Do I find that interesting? Because if I don't find it interesting, it's unlikely that someone else is going to. Although I enjoy data and nerdiness probably more than others. So maybe I'm not the best example of that, but obviously if I don't find it interesting, I doubt someone else is, if it's too nerdy. So does that kind of answer your questions about what might be in an impact story? I know that was kind of a long answer, but it seemed to tee me up for the next couple slides. So there's three framing that. So now that we've kind of talked about what goes into, like, what are the pieces, in my mind, there's three basic types of stories that you can write anytime you're going to be writing an impact about what you've done and what your organization is doing, or what your service is, and in particular for us. I think there's three kind of things that you can do. One is a success story, obviously highlighting what you do. Another is previewing future impacts of what you're going to do. And we'll talk about what each of these are. And then there's kind of like like a catch-all that maybe incorporates some or all of these things. And they don't, it's not a hard and fast, like, oh, you can only do this or you can only do this. But these are sort of the things, the structure that they often take. And so these are the success stories are definitely the most common type of impact story that people write, for obvious reasons. And they're used to really highlight the successes of your organization. Some things just to remember, again, these are some unsolicited free advice, but brag on yourself. I often will talk to people and they're like, oh, I don't want to seem like I'm bragging or, oh, we didn't do that much. No, you did. You always did. And it's always, it's always good to like, just highlight yourself, put yourself out there. I'm gonna put Maddie on the spot a little bit, but even like one of the things that I see a lot in national service in particular, and also young professionals, is that we often think that we're often unsure of how great of a job we're doing. And so we were going to a conference and I told Maddie and Ramsey, I said, I think the thing you'll get out of this conference is that you do an amazing job. Because once you like understand that you are doing a great job, I think we want to compare ourselves to like an idealized version of whatever is happening, and that's not always the case. So, brag on yourself. It's also good to consider your goals. So when we were writing this impact story that I was just talking about for the president's office, we had a lot of things that we wanted to say, but we went back and we remembered, oh, right, this was our goals, right? This is what we said in the beginning that we were going to do. So when you're thinking about the impact stories that you're writing for us in particular, think about what your position says it's going to do. So if your role is doing FAFSAs, remember, just keep that in mind, or your goal for a particular event. If you're going to tell me a story about an event you held or something you did, what was your goal for that, right? And then how did you work to achieve that? What was your progress? Don't be afraid to address failures either. So I said brag on yourself, but I think it's also good, it's also, to me, a real sign of maturity and a real sign of like understanding is when you're able to be vulnerable and say, you know what, this did not work. This part did not work out as expected, but here's what we learned. And here's how we're going to do better in the future. I've had to do that a lot over the years. So it's I think it's important to keep that in mind. So any questions about success stories and how you might use them before we kind of think about the next type of story of impact story people can write? Great. Well, so the other, real type that people write a lot are these things that I would call like a previewing of future impacts. And so they're often used to inform readers of upcoming events or upcoming things you're going to do to impact. And often I think when you want to use this is when maybe you've got an event. So say you've got an event coming up in December and you don't really have anything you wanted to report on in October, or what you are going to do in December is really awesome and you want us to know about that in advance, or you're maybe putting together something for your board, for the board of the organization you're serving for. And again, you've got an event coming up and you haven't done the event yet, but you want folks to know, what you've done to get there. So again, you want to consider what might be compelling to readers. Sometimes they're not necessarily recruitment as a primary purpose, but they can often serve as that function. So you can say, here's what we've done and here are what I still need folks to help me out with, right? And if you are going to use that as recruitment, like I said, you want to make sure you include that clear call to action. That's usually really important. these are also like, you can also think about these. One of the things you can do, so people often talk about press releases as like something you do before an event, and really within, like, I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds, but really what you should be doing before an event is a press advisory, and a press release is something you do after the event. And so a press advisory probably will include a call to action at the end, for people to come to your event or to learn more about your organization. A little bit different. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. I mean, I do, but I'm not going to. I won't bore you too much. And then there's like this other kind of category. So as you can see, it's the Doritos and Cheetos mix, all of the above. You know, keep your audience in mind. This is kind of catch-all. So maybe you want to highlight a bunch of things you did, but there wasn't like some big measurable result, but you want to say, look, we did 3 events this month and hosted 35 people. Next month, we're going to do this, this, and this. Maybe it's to report on to a funder or community leader about a particular challenge you face. That's not like a specific, like, this was the impact we've had, or this is what we're going to do. Maybe it's we're really facing, because of COVID, we're really lacking in volunteers. This RSV outbreak has really made it hard on us. This last couple of weeks, we haven't been able to have the volunteers that we normally have, or something like that. So it's just important to realize that there's not just those 2 types that you can do some impact stories, because you're really reporting on the impact of those challenges, and what has the impact that challenge had on the service that you want to perform. So any questions about the 3 types, those 3 sort of general types, before we kind of move on to a question about audience? Or any ideas about how you might use those stories? We're going to do a little activity in a minute. So definitely keep that question in mind, how you might write an impact story, and what you might write some impact stories about. So considering your audience. So it's always really important to remember who might be reading your impact story, regardless of your intended audience. So consider who'll be reading your story, and what they might, and more importantly, might not know about your program and work, and what they might know. So for example, sometimes I have seen people write reports and stories, and either they wrote it at a level where it didn't make sense, because I didn't, the reader doesn't know what they think they know, or worse, probably the worst thing that you can see, and I've seen this in reports as well, where you kind of almost insult someone by like saying something that like in kind of a backhanded way, and they know what they're talking about. So you just have to be really careful about that. Here's some audience some like, for you who are like the people who might be reading some of the reports, or like who you might have as an audience for the impact stories that you're going to be doing. So definitely agency leaders, board leaders, the various partner sites that we work with, community leaders, your own colleagues, local media, social media, the corporation, which is now AmeriCorps. So there's some different audiences, and each of those audiences probably have like a little different like lens of what they're looking for in what they want to hear from you. And so just thinking about that when you write that is always important. What they want to know, what they don't want to know, what they need to know, what they might not need to know, things like that. Some other things to remember is to avoid, acronyms or jargon. It's usually good. My advice is always to write out an acronym on a first use. You can do that by writing it out and then parensing the acronym and then use it. As always, there are exceptions. So in the in the journalism world, which we'll talk a little bit about that. Often there are some acronyms you don't need to because they're just so like straightforward, because people know what they mean. But like because they're known by an acronym more than they are as the full words. And always write to the level of your audience. So if you're writing something for the public, that's going to be written at a different level than if you're writing something for your board, or for a group of highly educated individuals. Just understand who is receiving the message. So I want to do a really quick, there was another assignment, but we're going to kind of combine these. So I want you to think about something that you have done in the last month or so. What kind of story of those stories, what would be the most advantaged type of impact story that we just talked about? So the success, future impact, or kind of that other challenge, which would be the most advantageous for you to use to write that story, and who would that audience be? I'm gonna give you just a couple minutes to think about that, and then I'm gonna ask for volunteers and or call on volunteers. We can do that both ways. So give you just a couple minutes to think on that. All right, so who would like to volunteer themselves to answer?
I wouldn't mind going first.
Great, go ahead.
So a story that I can think of has like one of the students in my class, when he had first came to our preschool, he had a really bad like anger problem, and he was kind of violent with the other students. And since then we've talked to his parents about it, kind of got a better understanding of his situation and his background and what's all going on. And since then, we've been really taking our time with him and like understanding his triggers and what really sets him off, what he's okay with and what he's not okay with, and how to calm him down. And I have seen huge progress with him. So much so that his dad had even told us like the other day, thank you guys so much for working with him. And he was telling us that his tantrums used to last like an hour to 2 hours, and now they only last a minute. And he's just improved so much, and nothing feels better than that. I love seeing that. However, I don't really know who my audience would be with that.
Okay, so we'll think about who would you be telling that story to, or who might you want to tell that story to? So if you were going to tell or what would be the differences if you're going to tell that story to me, who kind of knows what your program is, knows what you're doing, versus if you were going to tell someone out in the community who doesn't know what Elevate Pre-K does or how Elevate Pre-K works. What might be some of the differences between how you tell that story? And there may not be, but there may be, right?
Okay. Well, I guess then my audience would just be like some of the other parents to let them know how much we really care about the children and really try to take our time with them to make it a better environment for them, for each child.
See, exactly, and that's excellent. That's what I was hoping people might come to like see. So great. Would anyone else like to share, or do I need to call on some volunteers? Call on some volunteers, volunteer some people.
I'll go.
Great.
Shelley.
Shelley's always willing to jump in.
I'm horrible at these impact stories though. So I guess it's a good thing for me to try to do. Okay, let's see. I have one in mind. Over this program season with Terror Birds, we've been able to partner up with a new partner within the Flagstaff High School than we normally do. And that is the Native American Club. And they had initially reached out, and I was kind of given the opportunity to collaborate and spearhead that collaboration, to work on a courtyard that had been neglected for some time, but that the Native American Club students wanted to claim and really do some work so that it could be a cultural space within the school around Hopi and Navajo culture. And so the impact story is they had a lot of dreams and aspirations, but I feel like because I was able to be a point person for that project, we got a lot more accomplished than they even thought possible within just a few weeks. And what I've seen is the first day we had maybe 3 students kind of like, literally, like walking in, like, what's this going to be about? Are you going to really deliver? To one day we had a circle of like 20 students coming out to help with that project. And so I think the impact was that they saw that somebody took them seriously and wanted to help them execute that project. And now they're like super excited and feel like sky's the limit before some of them even graduate, on like what they can accomplish in that space, because we were able to get so much done. So I think my audience would be for just the administration, first off, within that school, to say, we're like a good partner and we're doing good work for the kids to like feel like they have their place. And beyond that, maybe the school district to say, like, this is important work that gives these kids a sense of place and purpose within their school. So I don't know. And then what do you, so feedback would be great.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great impact story. That's exactly what we would ask for. And I'm not the ELK program coordinator, but if I were Ramsey, that's exactly what I want to be able to tell the governor's office that my program is doing. But I think that also thinking about being able to tell that to the administration, right, is super important. We ask you to write impact stories for us, but also like thinking about how you report to your partners about, look, this is what we're able to do. And if you let us do more, this is what we can do for you, right? Those are really important. I think that's a really good insight. So I think you're right on track with what I think, and I think you told me a good impact story. Translating that then into like words, right? But if you were going to like report to the school board, right? If you went to a school board meeting and said, hey, here's what we're doing, we'd like to do more with the school board, I think you made a really compelling case of what the impact is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else like to go? I think we'll do one or two more, unless there's a great desire to share.
I could go.
Sure, Sarah.
Okay, I'll try and get my thoughts straight. Being sick. So just last week I put on like my largest event. So for context, I work at a campus garden at NAU. And this, so we put on a Halloween party last Friday, which was the largest event I've ever put on, and something I'd never thought I like would be capable of doing. And I think a lot of the like things that I'm really proud of within it is that while I kind of came up with the idea, it was a very collaborative process, and I had a ton of support from different student groups. So I invited like, I think 3 other student groups to come and help take care of different parts of it. And so it's been a really great like collaborative process working together. And we already are talking about doing future collaborative events because I really think they're all like sustainability related groups. And so I kind of thought like putting on an event that we could show that you can celebrate something like Halloween, like typical capitalist, like lots of single use sorts of things being used in the holiday, and like, you know, show a more sustainable way to do things. And so it came together really well. We had a ton of student engagement. Everyone kind of told me how much fun they had with it. And I think it's something that they could continue in the future. Even like next year, I won't be here, but I'm sure people could continue this on. And then it also just ran so smoothly because I think like having so many minds involved with the planning process, we had like really everything figured out. So I'm just really proud of how that went, how much student engagement we had, and how collaborative and engaging the process was with multiple other student groups. So I guess I'm also wondering about this audience question. Yeah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that's again you have a great idea for an impact story. So I'm going to offer two answers to your question. So think about if you were going to tell the president's office about what you had done and maybe if you were going to ask them for support in the future of maybe highlighting the event or even giving you some resources to expand the event. So how would it be different? How would that be different versus you telling maybe your supervisor, Peter, like reporting back to Peter how the event had gone, or telling Ramsey how the event had gone? Like, how is that a different, so there's different audiences that might want to hear about your story, but they might be interested in different pieces. So like the president's office is probably really interested in student engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, maybe someone who you're reporting back to is more interested in what the impact of your environmental, like, to me, the really cool thing that you highlighted was how we were able to do this with in a sustainable way. Like like I found that really interesting, but maybe a different audience might just be interested in the how many students you served and how you engaged them, or what was the learning outcome, right? So that's the thing that I would think that like I hope folks are able to kind of start like thinking about, and you're never going to be perfect with it, but it's just something to keep in mind when you're telling your story to someone, right? Is like, what do I think that person wants to know, or what might be important to them? Does that help?
That's really helpful. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I put it in the chat, but Maddie and I both went and we had a lot of fun. It was great. It was so cool to see all of the people out there. I thought the sustainable Halloween costume, the thrifted Halloween costume, that was a great one.
That was such a hit. Thank you guys so much for coming too. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I was so excited to see so many people there. That was great. Like I said, folks, I get to see Sarah's amazing work. I know you all do awesome work, but I get to see Sarah's work every day. So I like to brag on her. Anyone else want to share? And then we can kind of move on to the next couple sections, but just want to give anyone else an opportunity to share or ask questions.
Okay, I'll share because I have a question too.
Sure.
So I'm looking at my notes, and my impact story would fall under more of the other, because it's been busy with FAFSA's season. It started October 1st, and I am the only ARC member at the NACRC, and the Yavapai County College Access Specialist is no longer working in the county. So therefore, I have been busy servicing all the high schools with their FAFSA events, their FAFSA nights, as well as doing a workshop at the Prescott Valley Library. So I'm looking at it as my success would be I was able to provide the assistance that these high schools needed because they don't have a college access person helping the counseling office work with the parents and the students with their FAFSA application, as well as the students themselves. So then the future impact is that because of the amount of the activity that I've done going to different high schools, providing workshops, that the services that the NACRC provides is really important, especially moving forward, because of the fact that the number of students that I've seen, the number of high schools I've gone to, shows that there is truly a need for the NACRC services to all the high schools in the area in Yavapai County, as well as in Flagstaff, because I've also have gone up to Flagstaff to provide services. So would that kind of sound, would that be like an impact story? So like my audience would be, I think would be more the administration that, look, you know, like this is what we do, and now this is, and everyone at the high school was so ever grateful because they don't have anyone supporting their students. So they've actually have asked if I could go back to their schools on a bi-monthly basis, on a weekly basis, to provide that support. So I'm kind of thinking that way. So I guess my question is, am I on the right track with my impact story?
And I think that that's, you make a good point, is that sometimes these stories are going to be all of the above. Like, you're going to talk about what the challenges are, that you're the only one doing it, but here's the great impact that we've had, here's the successes, but here's the future impact, and then have a call to action. Like, if I were going to be giving this to the NACRC, or if you're going to give this to your administration, here's why you need to have more support in this area. Look at all the great things I'm doing. These are the challenges that we have, and here's why we need more resources as your call to action, right? You all need to put your money where your mouth is. If you say you're supporting these areas, maybe not. But again, thinking about your audience, what is the most persuasive way to make that sell? Sometimes it's straight up shame, I will tell you. Sometimes when you're trying to make a case for something, shame is a powerful motivator. But you have to know how and when to deploy that, right?
Okay. Yeah, because I don't have a single success story as the others have done, you know, like a single project or a single student,
Right.
Because I have been working with groups for the month of October. So,
and part of that is because you have to, right? That by necessity. That's the challenge that you've had, is that you've had to work with these big groups because you're the only one doing it, and to be able to serve, to give them services, you can't, you know, you have to do it in a big group. So that's a challenge that you face, and you can talk about that, and then, you know, make that case that they need to have more resources, right? So I think that's a perfectly valid impact story, and a really good way to use it that's not just for me. That's what I hope that you get out of this, is that while I ask you to do an impact story each month, that really in your work, you're often doing these in different ways, or there's different ways to tell your story, and to weave the impact of service into those cases. You're going to make it a lot more effective than if you just went to, like, by telling that whole story, right? You're going to make a more effective case of what's going on, and they're going to understand it better than if you just say, look, there's 1,000 students and there's only one of me. While that should actually be like the impact, telling that whole story, what we know is that humans are, there's some psychology behind this, but humans, when they have a story in their heads and a narrative, it makes more sense. It's just much more persuasive, because then they can visualize it, they can imagine it, they can see it. So does that answer your question, Amy? I know I kind of was a long ways around that, but
no, yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for those great stories. And if you have questions at the end, I have some time for that, but I want to make sure we get to everything. And also, we are rapidly approaching 11:30. So I want to be mindful of folks' time today on a Friday. So just some writing tips and other considerations. I just want to like make it clear that this comes from my experience. So my academic background is I'm trained as a journalist. I have a bachelor's of science in journalism. And so this is unsolicited free advice. But journalism is about telling stories, right, in a clear and concise manner, and often persuading people if we're writing editorials. But so one of the things that we use in journalism as a convention is something called the inverted pyramid. You often may only have a few minutes of a reader's time, especially if it's written. And we've seen, I think generation to generation that this has become shorter and shorter and shorter as messages become less and less coded, and people expect things really quickly. A tweet's 280 characters, right? For however long Twitter remains a thing. So you may only have a few minutes or a few seconds or a very short amount of time. And so by using this style of writing, you're going to convey things in a way that are hopefully easier for them to pick up quickly. So in an inverted pyramid style, we start with the lead. So that's what grabs someone's attention, and it's the most important, thing. It's actually spelled in journalism circles LEDE, and I hate it, so I won't do it. But then you have like a more detailed breakdown of what you told them in the lead. Then you can have some background info about those things, additional details, and then any biographical information about yourself, your organization, the people involved. So this is how like true news stories are structured, is this like inverted pyramid. So important things, less important things down the way. That way, if they only read the first paragraph, like the idea, like what you're taught in journalism, in what I was taught anyway, I don't know if they still do. I hope they still do. I would imagine. Is that someone should be able to understand the gist of a story based solely on reading the first paragraph. Like that is for a straight news story, everything that is important enough for someone to know is in that first paragraph. So just think about that when you're writing this kind of a story, or you're telling someone that they may only read the first paragraph, or they may just skim. So if you can put the most important things at the top, and what the biggest takeaway is, that's really a good idea. Stay positive. I think even when you're writing about challenges or failures, framing your stories in a positive way can help improve outcomes. Negative framing isn't particularly effective in persuasion. That's been shown a lot in studies, in scientific studies, and negative framing sells you yourself short. So I hate, as a sort of like corollary, I hate the interview question, what's your a time you failed? What's your biggest failure? I hate that interview question. And I have repeatedly answered that, well, I don't really think of them as failures. I think of them as things where things didn't go right, and it's an opportunity to learn, which is an example of changing that framing, right? Like, I don't think of, if something didn't go right, like I've worked in volunteer service for most of my life, shocked when things go perfectly right, because that rarely happens. But it's an opportunity to learn when something didn't go right. Like, we did a huge service event every year at WVU when I was at the Center for Service and Learning. We did a massive first 3 days of so like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we did a service with 5,000 students. It was always a big cluster. Nothing ever went exactly as we planned. And for example, we learned that bus drivers didn't know what they needed to do. So how do we have to fix that? So we learned for the next year what we needed to do. Like, there was some problems. I had to drive a bus without a CDL license to go pick up some kids, but it happens. So just framing that as, but I could make that as a really negative framing, and it sounds like I didn't know what I was doing. The answer is I did know what I was doing. I just didn't know what I didn't know. So framing those in positives, but like I learned a lesson here and here's how we fix that, or here's how we're going to fix that, is more persuasive, and it doesn't make me look as like big of an idiot. So just keep that in mind. Active voice and action words. I'm sure you've heard these things when you're like in basic writing. So again, unsolicited free advice. But just action words are much more able to, when you're like active voice is just better at illustrating things. Here's some example. So bananas are adored by monkeys. Monkeys adore bananas. The money was counted by the cashier. The cashier counted the money. The squirrel was chased by the dog. The dog chased the squirrel. And they're also just, the language is just more economical typically when you use active voice. Just one other consideration. So this is specifically to when you're writing news story, when you're writing like a press release or a press advisory, you should try and write that in AP style. The thing you will learn about journalists is their inboxes are always going to be full of things. And if they get something that requires them to do more editing than they want to do, or that they have time to do, they're less likely to run it. In public relations, which is my actual background in journalism, they taught us that if we sent someone something without AP style, it probably wouldn't get printed. Less true, but it's still a thing. AP style is just what we use. It changes all the time. You can go online and find it. There's some things just to remember, some real basic things. The basic differences between like AP style and regular writing is that it omits the serial or Oxford comma. I have to constantly remind myself when I do this when I do academic writing, especially now that I'm in grad school, because I do it all the time because it's just built into my head. But so like in AP style, it's Jan, Susan, and I, instead of Jan, Susan, comma, and I went to the lake. Use first and last names on first reference. So last name on all following references. So Sam Smith said on first, and then Smith said on following. Trademarks and other symbols should not be used when writing in AP style. And if you begin a press release with a dateline, use only a single city in all caps. You may also use a state if it's not clear. Typically anymore, they don't typically run that as much anymore. You don't see that as often. But that's just some basic AP stuff. So questions, comments, concerns? Not future impact stories. So our next set of reports is due the 14th. Or not the 14th, Friday the 11th. They're due on Friday the 11th. And that is for service that happened in the month of October. Any
I have a
other
question.
questions?
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think I got this answered, but I just want to make sure, because when it does the drop down, says submit reports, we do impact story, type it in, there's really nowhere to save. It just automatically is saved, and we're there, right?
I think there is a submit button at the bottom, but I can't see what you see.
Anybody else? No, I did not see submit. It just seems to,
Yeah.
because at the top it says submit reports when you have the drop down.
Yeah, I can't. Let me pull it up and let me see if I can see what you see.
You're muted, Andrew.
Was I muted for all of that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
you were.
have a drop down that says save.
Yeah.
Do you
Okay.
have that?
Yeah, I think so. Because I've already done 2, but
Okay.
Mandy, I think you told me I did it right.
Yeah, I could see that you had a great story and then you had volunteer mobilization, but if you've done any more than that, just go back in and make sure that it's fully saved and submitted.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. Anyone else have questions? If not, have a great weekend. Stay warm if you're in Flagstaff, although it seems to be nice enough out that snow is melting. I'm looking out my window. So have a great weekend.